everybody, and welcome to Friday night. This is Banfield. I'm glad you made it through the week, and I'm really glad you're here with me tonight. I have a lot of questions, and I have a lot of answers, and I have a lot of really smart people to help me get through this whole Brian Kohberger business. Some stuff dropped this week that had my jaw on the floor. Things that made a little sense, and then things that really didn't make sense about the surviving roommates in the house where those 4 people were murdered, those kids, those college kids murdered in Moscow, Idaho. The things that were now being texted between these 2 roommates while a murderer was killing their 4 friends. It's just sort of, well, it's confounding. And I think there are a lot of people who are theorizing what maybe these texts meant in the 911 call. I've got some of the best minds in the business on this program. In just a few minutes, you're going to hear what they have to say about it. Also, I had a conversation with Wendy Williams for 1 hour. And boy, can you cover a lot of ground in 1 hour. And I had a lot of ground I wanted to cover with her. Not only did she go into a lot more detail about just how restrictive this lockup is, where she is under guardianship in New York, like so restrictive, she's not allowed to have shampoo. Not kidding. You're going to hear in her own words. But also, I go there with her. I've known Wendy a long time, and I asked her some very pointed questions about substance abuse. She's been open about it before, and I asked her about some reports that she'd been drinking in the facility, and I asked her more deeply if she thinks that alcohol or substances has something to do with why she's in the conservatorship in the first place, why she's in this predicament. I think you'll be surprised at what Wendy tells me. You're going to hear a lot from her tonight. Don't tune out. Hear from her in her own voice, because there's a lot of scrutiny on this guardianship. And then also, 28 years ago, John Benet Ramsey was murdered. And I don't have to tell you there haven't been a whole lot of suspects, right? In fact, really only 2. Only 2. John Mark Carr, the very crazy guy who confessed to it and then was ruled out because his DNA didn't match. And then there's this other guy. There's this other guy. We never really heard much about the other guy, but we're starting to hear a lot more from his girlfriend about exactly what he was doing before the murder, during the night and morning of the murder, and after the murder. And you don't have to be a detective to say it sure sounds suspicious. Wouldn't it be nice if they had evidence from him? Oh, they did. Yeah, they did. In fact, that girlfriend was so suspicious of his behavior, she gave it to the police just days after the murder. She told them everything. And when I say everything, pages and pages of details, boxes and boxes of evidence. Did they ignore it? Because they had their sights set on John Benet's parents. We have an exclusive tonight with John Ramsey. He's going to talk to us a little bit about this. There's nobody who knows more about this case than the man who lost his daughter and is still looking for the killer. That's coming ahead in just a moment. I want to start here. The text messages are crystal clear. They're unmistakable. 2 roommates who survived a bloodbath at 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho, were absolutely terrified. No one is answering. I'm freaking out. Come to my room. Run. That is a text exchange between Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk, texting back and forth in panic mode. As unbeknownst to them, 3 of their housemates and a boyfriend were being knifed to death upstairs and down the hall. As you well know by now, the quadruple murder happened in the overnight hours of November 13th in 2022. But only now do we have the heart-pounding text messages between the 2 survivors in real time. And what I just read was only a very small sample. We also have the transcript of the rambling and chaotic 911 call that happened 6 hours later. Several people were on that call, frantically passing around the phone, but the call itself was placed by a next-door neighbor, identified only as H.J., who had come over to the house amid all the commotion. And by the looks of the transcript, H.J. placed that call after he, quote, discovered the body of Xana Kernodle. Hold on. The word discovered may be somewhat debatable here, because at no time does anyone ever say to the 911 dispatcher, there's been a bloodbath here, a bloody murder of both Xana and her boyfriend who died in the same room together. Nobody ever says that. And at no time does anyone ever mention that there are 2 more bodies upstairs on the 3rd floor The roommates Kayla Gonzalez and Maddie Mogan also stabbed to death in a bloody murder scene. The only thing the dispatcher hears is that there's, quote, one person unconscious, Xana. So it is hard to imagine that anyone simply discovered Xana unconscious. No, if they'd actually discovered Xana Kernodle, they'd have seen her lying in a pool of blood. There was so much blood in Xana's room, it was literally oozing out of the foundation wall on the outside of the house. I'm going to get to all of this in just a moment. I'm also going to get to the 911 call. At times, there were 4 different people, Bethany and Dylan, plus a neighbor identified only as HJ and another neighbor, EA. They're all on the line with a very confused and frustrated dispatcher. Let me read one of the passages from the 911 call. Dispatcher says, okay, and tell me exactly what's going on. Woman number 1. One of the roommates who's passed out and she was drunk last night and she's not waking up. Woman number 2. No, we saw dispatcher. Okay. Woman number 1. Oh, and they saw some man in their house last night? Yeah. Woman number 2. Hi, dispatcher. And are you with the patient? Okay, I need someone to keep the phone. Stop passing it around. This is where I bring in my experts, each of whom has been following this case from day one. Gigi McKelvey is the host of the very popular true crime podcast, Pretty Lies and Alibis. Dave Ehrenberg is the former state attorney for Palm Beach County, Florida. And Alexandra Kazarian is a trial lawyer with the firm Garagos and Garagos. Welcome to all of you. I have a lot of questions about the evidence that was revealed this week. Gigi, I'm going to start with you. HJ, the neighbor, is said to have discovered the body of Xana Kernodle, but they are only talking to the dispatcher about an unconscious Xana. Help me understand what you think discovered means, because there is no way in hell anybody who saw anything in Xana Kernodle's room would have done anything other than scream at the top of their lungs and beg for police to come right away. There's been a bloody murder.
Yeah, I mean, it's curious. Of course, we don't know how much he saw. Did he just peek in there and maybe see a little bit, not fully going in the room to see everything? I mean, clearly this is going to be a very bloody murder scene. Is he in shock when he's on the phone with 911? I mean, you have to consider too, maybe he saw more than he conveyed to the dispatcher, but was just his body had went into protection mode where you're doing good just to talk. There's so many questions about it. I'm really curious to see the testimony when it comes out, to see maybe over time and being out of that moment for so long now, is it more clear what he saw, or, you know, but I'm with you. It would be so hard not to see a lot of blood unless he just barely peeked in there and freaked out and ran.
Well, and this is what I'm wondering, Dave. We do know from some of our past research of that home with other housemates, because it turns over, right? The roommates move out, other roommates move in as the kids graduate, new people come in. But before these kids had this house, other people had this house, and they were individually rented rooms. Each room had locks. And in fact, I think it was Xana's room that had the lock replaced, within the weeks prior to this. So I'm just wondering if it's possible that door might, as a prosecutor, I'm just wondering how you would process this information. Is it possible that that door to Xana's room was closed and locked, and they did not know what was behind those doors? But if one of them, as Gigi just mentioned, got down on the floor and peeked under the door and saw a hand on the floor or a body on the floor, and it's dark in there, they can't make out blood, but they can definitely see someone lying on the floor asleep and out of it and unable to respond. Does that maybe make more sense as to why these kids and this neighbor would make that kind of a phone call saying Xana's unconscious?
Sure. We don't know all the details, but remember, these individuals have been drinking heavily, and then the next day they're full of shock and horror, and we don't know what they saw and how much they could see. I mean, we also now know about the incident with the fact that the roommates did not call 911 right away. Now, the text messages show why, because they were freaking out. So there were a lot of unanswered questions that lead to conspiracy theories, but none of this shows that Brian Koberger isn't the guy who did this. I mean, there are some issues with what did you see and when and why didn't you notice the stabbings? Why did you say she was unconscious? Well, that's just human nature, especially after you've been drinking and you have extreme trauma the next day and you have a neighbor next door who's not really familiar with what's going on. So you can just explain it away as just it's reality. It's not a contrived world like you see on TV.
It's not perfect. And Alexandra, I don't know if you remember, back being a college kid as girls, you had a certain amount of trepidation if you saw an unknown man walking through your house. Look, every roommate might have friends coming in and out. Some had drug dealers coming in and out. So if you opened your door at 4 a.m. and saw a guy all clad in black with a mask, it would freak you out. But it certainly wouldn't send you into the realm of, I wonder if my 4 roommates were just slaughtered. And I feel like the people on the internet who attack these two roommates aren't putting their head in their heads at that time. They're talking with current information in their heads. And I find that wholly unfair.
Oh, I totally agree with that. And, jurors are told when they're in a trial that they are the finders of fact. And I always, as a defense attorney, have found that so problematic because a conviction has to be based on solid evidence. But if there are these questions and a jury's told that it's your job to find the facts in this case, then really what is the conviction being based on? Because I understand the theory that, these little discrepancies might not prove that Brian Kohberger didn't do it, but do they? Because if there's all these little facts that we're stacking up on top of each other, and that's the foundation for the conviction, if the little facts are off kilter, then you've got an off kilter foundation. And so I do think it matters. I do think that these witness statements that just don't make sense really need to be analyzed. And before they're brought to a jury and before a jury is told, well, you figure it out, I think that there does need to be some kind of a prosecutorial theory as to why it just doesn't make sense. Because if it doesn't make sense, then if the evidence doesn't make sense, you shouldn't convict somebody.
I was particularly taken, Gigi, by the text exchange that it was Bethany in the basement floor. Her room was on floor 1, which is parking lot level, right? Dylan's room is on floor 2, and the girls, Maddie and Kaylee, are on floor 3. And Xana's way over on the far right if you're looking at the house on floor 2. But it was Bethany on the basement level who texted something about, looks like Xana's dressed all in black. And I wanted to get your read on whether this was more like, did that need a question mark at the end? Was she making a statement, or was she repeating something was said to her by Dylan? Because Dylan is the person who saw the person all in black. Do we have 2 roommates who now saw the person all in black and Bethany mistook the person for Xana wearing black? And if that's the case, did Bethany see the killer on the basement level? Because we've only ever known that he was on the 3rd floor and the 2nd floor and went out the back. What do you make of that?
Well, as far as just the question mark, I think it's important to point out, like a lot of college kids, they have been drinking that night. You can tell with the text message. Some of it looks like it maybe came from somebody who had a couple of drinks. So the question mark didn't really bother me. I think that what people forget, and I've seen a lot of the hate towards these roommates, and I think it's very displaced. These texts really show that they were there and they saw something, and it really establishes this timeline for the investigators. It gives a good time frame of when we think these murders happened. But as far as the question mark goes, you see the fear in them. I just didn't put a whole lot into just the question mark of this is kind of really the first time I've thought about it with you saying it. It's a good point, actually, but maybe just drinking. It's early in the morning. You're not thinking straight.
Yeah.
You're tired. You're confused and obviously a little traumatized by what, is being conveyed back and forth. You get each other freaked out. And unfortunately, they had no idea how freaked out they should have been.
Right. They're thinking there's just some shadowy figure in the house, maybe a burglar, maybe a drug dealer, maybe a friend of one of the roommates who shouldn't have been wandering. I'm 100% plus convinced they have absolutely no idea of the horrors that are actually happening. And actually, that brings me to you, Dave, as a prosecutor. This is kind of in the weeds, but I'm going to say it in layman's terms, and you tell me if I get it right or wrong. The reason we have these filings right now, this week, right, for the first time, we're seeing these text messages. is not for the truth that the text messages offer. They are an exception to the hearsay rule just because they want to establish a timeline. Why does that matter? And if you read the fine print, it says they plan to have Bethany and Dylan testify. We all expected that would happen. But then why do you have to have this hearsay stuff? If they're going to testify, you can ask them about their text messages. Is this filing in case they don't have them get up on the stand, that you can use their text messages without them?
No, they're going to testify. They got to authenticate the text messages anyways. And really, their testimony is so much more powerful now that you have the text messages. So when the defense lawyer says, oh, but you didn't call 911, and tries to put doubt in the jurors' minds, they can go back to the text messages and see in real time what they were thinking, how freaked out they were. They can see the timeline. They can see the fact that someone was walking around in all black and a ski mask. So it's important to introduce those text messages because they are what you call present sense impressions, which is an exception to the hearsay rule. And the reason why is that it's a spontaneous comment. It's got to be made while the person was perceiving the event. And that spontaneity makes it trustworthy. And that's why it's allowed in under an exception to the hearsay rules. And it'll be powerful corroborating evidence to their testimony in real life.
Like an excited utterance. Alexandra, I'm going to ask you to think through this sort of as, again, it's just us girls talking, but one thing I couldn't understand, and I hope that the facts will help me get through this at trial, was why these two roommates have a neighbor and other friends coming to the house to deal with the crisis that is, I'm assuming, behind the locked door of Xana Kernodle's room. They're trying to revive Xana. They're trying to call her, text her. She's not answering. For whatever reason, someone thinks she's unconscious there. But at no point does anyone walk up the stairs to Kaylee and Maddie's rooms and say, hey, girls, do you know anything about why Xana's not answering? Did you guys give her something? Were you out drinking with her? We can't rouse her. And yet they call other people to the house. If they'd only walked up the stairs, they would have seen the horrors and imagined maybe those horrors exist behind the door of Xana's room. Is that something that a defense attorney can seize on? Or is this just kids being kids and not making sense? It has nothing to do with whether Kohberger's guilty or not.
I think that kids in college that are living in a house where people are partying constantly, I think that their biggest real fear is somebody dying of alcohol poisoning while they're there. Somebody having some kind of a tragic accident that can be blamed on them. Oh my God, was Jonna so drunk that we should have done something to help her and now she's not responding and now we're in trouble. I think that's the first thing that college kids think about. Am I in trouble for this tragedy that's happening right now? I think alarm bells go off. Are my parents going to be pissed because I've been drinking? So I think that's what's going through their head. Am I in trouble? So I don't even think that they have to do something.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think they have the capacity to think what else is going on? How much bigger can this get? Because this is the exact, this is the emergency, is I might be faced with Jonna not waking up, and how am I going to deal with this? How am I going to get myself out of this? I don't think the fact that somebody might have slaughtered everyone in that house was ever going to
ever crossed anyone's minds. I agree with you. The biggest fear at this point is they think somebody is, incapacitated and might have OD'd or choked, that kind of thing. But hell, did they not know the hell that awaited them? Gigi McKelvey, Dave Ehrenberg, and Alexandra Kazarian, thank you all. Really appreciate this. There's still so many questions. I'll have you all back.
Thanks, Ashleigh.
And I mean that. I still have lots more questions. By the way, if you like that story, if you like stories like that, and you want to learn more, be sure to check out my new podcast, Drop Dead Serious. It's available wherever you get your podcasts. Just check that QR code. You'll find it. Drop Dead Serious. Still ahead tonight, a Banfield exclusive. Did police in Boulder, Colorado have a viable suspect 28 years ago in John Benet Ramsey's death and ignore everything about him? John Ramsey tonight on a woman who swears her boyfriend was the killer and the evidence she turned over. Is it possible to still follow that lead? John is live with me next.
can occur. Get help right away for face, mouth, tongue, or throat swelling, wheezing, or trouble breathing. Tell your doctor of new or worsening eye problems like eye pain, vision changes, or blurred vision, joint aches and pain, or a parasitic infection. Don't change or stop asthma or other medicines without talking to your doctor. Dupixent, the #1 prescribed biologic by dermatologists and allergists, helps you feel the heal. See the difference for yourself. Reach out to your eczema specialist today.
Did Boulder police have a viable suspect in the John Bonet murder 28 years ago and then just let him slip right through their fingers? A Colorado woman named Jacqueline Dilson says yes. She says she told the police just a few days after the murder that her boyfriend might have something to do with it. And then she backed it up with a whole lot of evidence that she handed over to them. That boyfriend was Chris Wolf. She said he disappeared on Christmas afternoon and he returned hours later in, quote, a psychotic frame of mind. And then he left again that night, she said, until 5:30 a.m., December 26th. She said as he was in the shower, she could see his muddy clothes on the bathroom floor. The Boulder police brought him in for questioning, but then they let him go after he refused to give a DNA sample and refused to give a writing sample. He was one of only 2 people ever detained in the Ramsey case. Jacqueline Dilson says police were so focused on John Bonet's parents, John and Patsy, that they didn't even bother investigating her boyfriend further. But she didn't give up. She gave them all her boyfriend's clothes, bed sheets, so that they could test his DNA. She handed over samples of his writing, his handwriting, which she thought matched that famous ransom note that was found in the Ramsey home. She brought in some rope that she had purchased just days before the murder, but suddenly noticed several feet were missing. She told police that a fur hunting hat that her boyfriend used to wear was suddenly gone. And you'll remember that there was something called strange animal hair found at the murder scene. She told police that a flashlight was missing from her house. And you'll remember there was a flashlight that did not belong to the Ramseys that was found on the kitchen counter. Finally, Jacqueline Dilson told the police that her boyfriend, Chris Wolf, was a raving anti-capitalist who called John Ramsey a, quote, merchant of death prior to the murder. She said Wolf wanted John Ramsey to die, quote, and that she believed that he believed that John was sexually abusing his daughter. These are the things that she told police she believed about her boyfriend. Veteran homicide detective Lou Smith said he believed Jacqueline Dilson, said she was a good witness, and that Chris Wolf was a promising suspect, but Lou Smith died in 2010. Other detectives thought that Jacqueline was unstable. One even said he didn't think her evidence was ever tested. I'm joined now once again exclusively by John Ramsey, John Bonet Ramsey's father. John, it's good to see you again, as always. I'd never read so deeply into this person's story. I'd never read so deeply into the sheer volume of evidence and statements that Jacqueline gave the police. And I certainly had never heard one of the detectives say, we're not even sure if we tested it. What are your reactions to hearing that list? And I know you already know about it. There's no one who knows more about this case than you. But what's your reaction to this?
Well, yeah, some of the items you mentioned, I didn't know about. I know Jackie came to us early on. We'd hired our own investigators, and she'd come to us, I think, out of frustration with the police, and related pretty much the same thing that you just went through to us, and pretty compelling. And we had hoped that the police would hold through. And the problem was that they had decided on day one that it was the parents. I think they decided it was me, that one of the so-called detective that was there that morning said, well, she knew I was a killer because she saw it in my eyes, which is a remarkable talent. But this is kind of a nuisance to have to deal with in their mind because they already knew the answer. And so I don't know how thoroughly Chris Wolf was looked into. I've met with Jackie personally, not recently, but she's been very persistent in this for years. And she seems like a very solid, normal person to me, and very her story's very consistent in terms of what she believes and what her observations were. So I don't know.
John, do you have any idea? And I get it. I know that police work in secrecy. It's part of preserving an investigation, but we're 28 years in at this point. Do we know if the new and invigorated cold case team and anybody else in the Boulder PD who we've started to feel like they care a lot more about really solving this case, do we know if they're looking at any of her evidence? Did they keep any of the evidence that she turned over? Are they even asking Chris Wolf, he's alive, for his DNA today?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a very good question, and it's one I'll pose to them. We met with the chief of police and his staff a month or two ago, and had a good meeting. But as you say, they're very cautious to disclose what they're doing, which is, I understand why they do that. But that's a good question.
Do you have any idea if? Do you have any idea why this particular story seems to have been somewhat buried? I mean, it wasn't in the Netflix documentary that recently came out, which has been sort of the new generation's introduction to your daughter's case. Any idea why it just sort of fell by the wayside?
No. We had 4 or 5 people like this come to us, like Jackie, with pretty credible circumstantial information that made that candidate look very interesting. Chris Wolf was one of them. I don't know. That's a good question. I think, one of the people that had come to our attention was Gary Oliva, and he was in the news about the time this Netflix documentary was put together, just been released from prison. And he, on circumstantial stuff, he was pretty compelling as well. So I think Chris Wolf was kind of got lost in the chaos. And
well, Jacqueline Dilson has this book coming out, and it's certainly getting a lot more attention now. And all it takes is to match the DNA that they have now been able. The integrity of it is small, but that can be worked with to match that to an actual person. And who knows if they're doing that? John, will you come back again when we find out more about this?
I'd be happy to, Ashley. Thanks for your interest in it.
Well, I will never give up being interested in it. I feel that if there's anyone who deserves justice, sir, it is you. I do appreciate you being on tonight. Thank you, John.
My pleasure. Thank you.
John Ramsey joining us live tonight. Coming up after the break, it was barbaric, it was atrocious, it was cruel, and no one should ever have to die this way. Depending on where you stand on the death penalty, I could be talking about the man who faced a firing squad tonight for a double murder in South Carolina, or I could be talking about the victims who died violently at the other end of his baseball bat. Regardless, it is the first time in 15 years a firing squad has lined up opposite a condemned man in the United States and opened fire. After the break, the step-by-step of how it happened, and I'll speak to the person who spent 2 hours with this inmate just before he died.
Closure notices, and you realize you've got 4 mortgages on your house that you didn't even know existed.
Find out if you're already a victim and start your $1 million triple lock protection today at HomeTitleLock.com.
You might consider this next story the most twisted version of the game, Would You Rather? Would you rather die by electric chair, lethal injection, or firing squad? That was the game Brad Sigmund was forced to play in real life today in South Carolina. To be clear, the state of South Carolina told Brad Sigmund to choose the manner in which he would be executed for a double murder he committed back in 2001, and he chose firing squad. I'll get to the details of the execution in a minute, but first, the murders. 2 decades ago, Brad Sigmund took a baseball bat to the parents of his ex-girlfriend and bashed them until they were dead. Then he kidnapped that ex-girlfriend, planning a fate that we will never know because she escaped and ran for help. Now, after more than 2 decades of legal wranglings, including a confession, Brad Sigmund was shot to death at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Witnesses say he was marched to the execution chamber, seated in a chair behind bulletproof glass that separated him from the spectators, and then his attorney read his last statement aloud. The executioners then placed a hood over his head, pinned a target to his heart. A reporter for the Associated Press witnessed what happened next.
The prison employee lifted up the shade, and then from that point, it was a little less than 2 minutes of nothing. at that moment. I mean, you could see Brad Sigmund took several pretty deep breaths, and then suddenly the shots rang out at, I believe Christy said it was 6:05 and 50 seconds. At that point, you did see a small red stain on Sigmund's chest. It was irregularly shaped, but oval, if that makes sense. I mean, like it wasn't like a circle; it was an oval shape. That's when the prison employee announced 6:08 as the time of death.
In South Carolina, the firing squad is made up of just 3 marksmen, and all 3 have loaded rifles, which is different from other protocols in other states that require 5 marksmen, one of them firing blanks. In Sigmund's execution protocol required all 3 marksmen fire a single shot at once from behind a wall 15 feet away, and then just hope that that single bullet hits the target, Sigmund's heart. If any of this sounds surprising, it is the first time an inmate has died by firing squad in the United States in 15 years. This morning, Brad Sigmund was allowed to meet with his spiritual advisor one last time, and that advisor is Reverend Hillary Taylor, Executive Director of South Carolinians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, and she's here with me live. Reverend, thank you so much for being with me right now. Can you share what you spoke with Brad about for the 2 hours that you met today?
Yes. When I was with Brad this morning from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m., Brad and I and another spiritual advisor talked about supporting family and friends and one another. His concern was for the people that he loved, the people that he had formed community with before his incarceration and also during his incarceration.
So I understand that in this very, I think, macabre, method of choosing your own method of dying, he was very afraid of lethal injection because 3 of his fellow death row inmates and friends had done lethal injection and had had terrible experiences, and he was very concerned about the pain, and thus he chose the least painful, as he was advised, method, which was firing squad. Some people who are watching, who have no sympathy for this man because of the crime, would say that the victims died such a painful death. They died such a horrendous death, so much more painful than lethal injection, electrocution, or firing squad. Why did he have any concern about that level of pain that he inflicted on them as opposed to the level of pain he was trying to avoid himself?
Expressed remorse every day of his incarceration at the violence that he caused, and sought to be a different person since his incarceration. And with the agency that he had while he was incarcerated on death row, tried to be as supportive and loving, as kind as possible to everyone in his midst, whether that was his neighbors on death row, whether that was corrections officers, whether that was pen pals and family members that he was supporting from afar emotionally and spiritually. And the thing that Brad was forced to do was to make an impossible decision between being injected with poison by people who are not medical doctors, being cooked alive by an electric chair, or having his chest blown out of having his heart blown out of his chest by the firing squad.
I am so sorry for you, Reverend Taylor. This has to be the hardest line of work, going through what you've gone through today, and I'm appreciative for the work you do. And I'm sorry that you lost somebody who you cared for. And for those victims, I feel terrible for them as well. It's a very hard line to broach. Thanks for being on tonight.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too. For over a year now, Wendy Williams has been holed up in a very restrictive, albeit very expensive, New York facility under a guardianship that is drawing so much scrutiny. I recently talked to Wendy for over an hour, and she revealed a lot of things that she has not said before, especially when it comes to alcohol and drugs, and just how much more restrictive her living situation is than we first thought. Like even the shampoo is locked up. Wendy, in her own words, next.
Supports First Team, driving progress for the next generation, on and off the course.
Not since Britney Spears galvanized a movement against conservatorships has a celebrity drawn as much attention for one as Wendy Williams. I recently talked with Wendy for about an hour, and we covered everything from her state of mind to the cognitive retesting she says has not yet taken place. The facility where she's locked up in New York City is beautiful, she says, but it's very expensive. She's paying for it. And very restrictive, to the point where Wendy says they won't even trust the residents on her floor, the memory floor, with shampoo.
Yesterday, there were two women who came in, one who works on this floor, and this other woman who I'd never met before, but they were talking about the bathroom. Gina, remember I was telling you this?
Yeah.
It was really weird, right? So they wanted to know they want to make sure that everything is safe. I said, okay, what do you mean safe? I mean, how much more safe can you be than, in this building? I mean, this is like, oh my gosh. So they said regarding the shampoo and conditioner. I said, what about it? You mean in the shower? They said, yes. They wanted me to, they asked if they can keep, the shampoo and conditioner, safe so that it's safe. So anytime that I wanted to do shampoo and conditioner, I have to be allowed for somebody to bring it to me. You know what I'm saying?
Wendy says that the elevator is locked and that if she wants to use the gym, she has to be escorted. She says she spends her days watching a lot of TV, including a lot of NewsNation. And I asked her about a recent report that she was caught drinking in the cafeteria at the facility, and her response surprised me.
Wendy, real quick, there was a headline, I think a week or two ago, that said that there was an issue in a restaurant with you being drunk at the facility. Was there any truth to that?
When I first got here, right, and I came from Connecticut, I was there for a year. And, I won't call it a party, but what I will say is that, there, first of all, as far as eating, I wasn't on this floor, you know what I'm saying? All of the food was, above. And there were a whole bunch of people there, you know what I'm saying? And there was, food and yes, there was alcohol. And yes, I partook at that time. However, I must tell you that I am sober and will stay sober for the rest of my life. I have more important things to do. And by the way, I wasn't silly drunk, just so that you know. But, there are more important things to do in my life. And the most important thing is to get out of this guardianship mess so I can move on with the rest of my life and get back to work, doing the work that I like,
So about that, after the break, I asked Wendy whether drugs and alcohol had anything to do with why she's in the situation that she's in right now. And her answer might surprise you. It's next. Wendy Williams has been open in the past about struggling with drugs and alcohol, even admitting on her show that she needed to go into a rehab. So I asked her in our hour-long conversation whether she thinks that drugs, substances, alcohol, whether any of it might be responsible for the situation that she's in right now. And what she said, I was not expecting.
I remember when I was on your show and we were talking, you were working so hard on your sobriety. It was such a critical part. You were very public with it with your audience too. Do you think that maybe alcoholism or any substance abuse really kind of drove towards the circumstance that you're in now? Do you have a feeling one way or the other?
No, I told you the way I got involved with this was my money. The money, and that's how I got involved with Guardian. And that's how my money got stopped at Wells Fargo. Now, as far as alcohol had nothing to do with that, However, yes, I have gone to a few, facilities for that, you know what I'm saying? And I'm proud to say, that I'm sober for the rest of my life, I'm also proud to say that my body is as beautiful as it ever has been. Thank God. And I still like to do the same things that I love to do. I love to sew. You know what I'm saying? I love to sew, and I love to change the nail polish, you know what I'm saying? And I still love it. I wear lipstick all the time, not the whole makeup thing, no, but lipstick regularly, you know what I'm saying? my life has not changed, so much so. The people that I enjoy speaking with, oh my gosh, are the same people. Like for instance, oh my gosh, there I am on NewsNation. Look at me go. Oh gosh. Look, I love seeing TV and I see myself on TV. It's just like the cat's meow.
We love having you. I've always been a big admirer of yours, Wendy. I really always have been. And I mean it. I filled in for her on the Wendy Show when she was having her difficulties. I filled in as a host, and I was a guest on her show a lot. She was always really fun, Some of the charities that we did stuff together, she was always really fun. And if I learned one thing in my hour-long conversation with Wendy, she wants that back. She wants to be out there again. She wants to be on TV or radio. She wants to be back with people, doing what she does, talking, how you doing? She told me again she is 100% sober. She insists that she is not cognitively impaired. And to that, I want to say this. To have your freedom taken away, it's got to be bad, right? It's got to be really bad. I did not get that sense from my conversation. I'm not a doctor. But I did not get the sense that she's at a level where she needs her constitutional freedoms in America taken away. She says she wants out from this suffocating guardianship so that she can return to that career of hers. It's what she plans when she gets out, if she gets out. By the way, you can listen to my entire hour-long conversation with Wendy on my podcast, Drop Dead Serious. Right there, there's the QR code. Take a picture. You can find it. You can get it wherever you find your podcasts. And if you want to watch, you can watch this as well on YouTube. Again, QR code's there. Thanks, everybody, for watching, and have yourself a really good weekend. Stay safe out there. Be careful. I'll see you on Monday. Cuomo's next.
Chris Cuomo here. Welcome to NewsNation. Some food for thought. Many of you say to me, you can't make sense of what Trump is up to and why the Democrats seem to be misplaying so much so often. I think I know. I believe the answer to the question is that both sides are stuck in campaign mode. Now, why? Well, first of all, that's what we reward, right? They're raising money all the time. They're going after each other all the time. And opposition has become a legitimate position, so they don't really do anything when they're governing except saying, I'll stop the other side. They are both addicted to getting at the grievance that did decide the election. But that was then. The campaign is over. And that cheap form of fomenting tension is not helping get anything done on either side. That is the answer. That is the answer to the hype of Trump and Musk and the hysteria